Hey guys, Brian here from Starlite Pulp, and today I have Mr. Andrew Miller on the Pulpcast. He has a new book out called Namaste Mart Confidential. Actually, it's his first novel, so we're excited to talk about that. Andrew is also somebody who has been in the Starlight Pulp Review in the past as well, so we know him a little bit as an author. He's actually been on one of these Pulpcasts in the past as a contributor. So, Andrew, how you doing today, man?
Doing great, man. I'm glad to be here. Been watching this for a while. It's exciting to finally be on.
Very cool. Yeah, I appreciate having you, man. We've actually been talking about this for a while,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you have known that this was going to come out for what, a good year and a half or so, right?
Yeah, I didn't know exactly when, but I turned my draft into Run Amok last July. So yeah, I knew it was going to be sometime around now. It was just kind of dependent upon their schedule.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, very cool. Okay, so Namaste Mark Confidential. Basics, basics, unlicensed PI slash crime novel, Los Angeles,
Correct.
2013.
Correct.
Okay. So uh so give us a little bit of a feeling, a synopsis, a pitch about what the novel's about.
So it's basically, it's a crime novel. I would say it's a dark comedy. I know we'll probably get into it later, but you can tell from the title, and you know this about me. I'm very influenced by James Ellroy, and to me, Elroy's books are amazing, and I don't think he gets enough credit for how just absolutely hilarious they are at times. And so I think it's a very funny book. One of the first I sent when I sent you one, and I sent one to our mutual friend Gabe Hart, and I remember him texting me that he was laughing while he was reading it, and so that was kind of that was something that I was hoping for. But yeah, it's two unlicensed private detectives in LA in 2013. It's all fiction. It's all completely fictional, but the personalities of the detectives are very closely based on myself in 2013, who is the narrator. And then there's this character, Richie Walsh, who is based off of a very good friend of mine who is just kind of an endless source of, you just have that friend sometimes that is just like an endless source of material for your fiction. And they are unlicensed private detectives, but they maintain their day jobs at a spiritual hippie grocery store in West Hollywood called Namaste Mart. They get work, but they don't get work enough, and they have to maintain their jobs while they're working on various cases. And the overall plot of the story is that this woman who was an actress in the 1980s and early 90s, but now she runs a chain of lingerie stores, high-end lingerie stores. One of her employees has gone missing, and because these two characters, Adam and Richie, they've been able to show that despite how unlikely it might seem, that they're very good at finding people who have gone missing. And she hires them to find her missing employee. This missing woman, she has this background in she was born on a Mormon polygamous compound before she came to
Right.
LA. That's where she came, and she kind of escaped that. And then once she came to LA and arrived, at first, her boyfriend was a guy who was in the Armenian mafia. And so this case basically takes these guys up against the Armenian mob. It takes them up against fringe outlaw polygamous Mormons, and through the entire time they have to keep clocking in to work at Namaste Mart.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Very cool. Yeah. And something you said there, I think it is so underrated, I think, how many crime writers use comedic elements well.
Sure, sure.
And because like you mentioned with Elroy, who can be quite funny, when I read some of the old Chandler books,
Yeah,
I laugh out loud at
yeah.
some
His
at,
his descriptions, like someone will walk into a room, and the way, I mean, I can't, I'm drawing a blank on like a good example, but like the way that he describes somebody or someone that like Marlowe finds ugly or something, it's
yeah,
hilarious. It's
yeah.
so funny. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
absolutely.
we just posted something the other day on Instagram that was from Farewell My Lovely. Uh,
Yeah.
and it said he was about as inconspicuous as a tarantula on a piece of angel cake. And just that kind of thing, just like, those kind of little one-liners are just they're just gold, and they're hard to come by. And I think oftentimes there's this element in crime writing just in general of between the gritty aspect of it and then the violence. That's
Yeah.
what that's what most people kind of glom onto. But man, there's some fantastic humor in
Yeah, I mean, it's a genre that shows that life is absurd. Like it's just you really when you delve into the darkness, which is what part of the a really important part of the job of anyone that's a crime writer needs to do. They really need to like delve into what people are capable of doing, which most people don't think about. That's just something that like, most people in their regular life, they don't think about how horribly human beings can behave to each other. But there's this other element with that where yeah, it's horrible, but it's also just so absurd. Like you can't do anything sometimes but just laugh about it, or you just gotta laugh and keep on going. And Elroy is someone that highlights that. And one other interview I did for this book, I talked about the show The Shield on FX, which I'm a huge fan of,
Mhm.
which was a show that was unspeakably disturbing at times, but it was also hilarious. Like it was such a fun show to watch. I really like that. I always tried to kind of emulate that when I in my own work.
And it's hard to do too, because if you don't do it right, it comes across as inappropriate or trite.
Right, for
And
sure.
and
Sure.
though that doesn't work, but when it's done properly, man.
Or that you're just like if it's not done right, it comes off like you're like, oh, I'm trying to shock you. I'm trying to shock your sensibilities. And it just comes off as phony. Yeah, I agree. I see what you mean.
Yeah, yeah. All right, cool. So I'm gonna read you a couple of blurbs, okay,
Yeah.
from that have been written about your novel,
Mhm.
and I want you to just comment on them because
Yeah, yeah.
we as writers, it's always strange whether somebody loves the writing or whether they don't love the writing. It's
Yeah.
always strange to read someone else's comments about your own work
For sure. For sure.
because you spend so long on it, you
Mhm.
know editing it and writing it and going over it and going over it and rereading it. And all of a sudden, somebody else reads it and they get a completely different take than what
Yeah.
you did.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not uncommon in any way.
for
So,
sure.
first one actually is from Gabriel Hart, who you've mentioned. He's also been in the review. He's a
Yeah.
friend of ours here. We both know him. Great guy, very good writer. But he wrote about Namaste Mart Confidential. He wrote, "What a ride. I don't think contemporary Los Angeles has been through this level of meat grinding satire before. Only a writer as skilled as Miller can pull off this kind of gonzo and still keep it down to earth."
That was an incredibly nice thing to hear just because Gabe is just he's a good friend and someone who I respect so much, but I will kind of get like I'll try to just find some obscure thing, like some obscure book or some old movie or album or some podcast or something. And I'll tell people in my life like I just discovered this and it's so good. This is so cool. And they've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Gabe is the one guy that like no matter what you come up with that you found that you're interested in, he knows what you're talking about. He keeps track of everything. He knows everything about what's going on in the culture currently, what's going on in the past. He's so good at reviewing. He's interviewed so many people, and to have him word that way, that was really special to me. That was a really nice thing to hear and to know what I already know, which is that he's read so much of this genre and that he's singling mine out. That was really cool. That was really exciting.
That's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder if you were talking about him kind of having a finger on the pulse of
Yeah.
what's going
Yeah.
on, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if that has to do with the fact that Gabe's just a cool guy, or
For
or
sure. Yeah.
him being a journalist also kind of helps that because he's always interviewing people. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
might be
it's
that. But yeah,
that. It's that. I mean, I think he's just a curious guy and he's open to he's open to new things. I mean, it's especially difficult for someone to say what I said about him. It's difficult for somebody at any time, but it's especially difficult now because so many people, they live in the world that they've curated on their phone. So everyone, they have their own world where they get the things that they want to hear, but they
Well,
don't
it's
get
it,
something
it's
else.
it's
He's
their own it's their own echo chamber.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's not. Gabe's not like that at all. Yeah.
Yeah, short, very quick little Gabriel Hart story. He asked me to a reading about a year ago, maybe a little over a year, something like that, and it was out in 20 Joshua Tree, and went out there, had a blast, did the reading, and there's a backing band.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So Gabriel's reading, and then Gabriel picks up the saxophone, goes in the band, and just starts playing.
Yeah.
And I'm
I
like,
did that. I did that event.
what's happening?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I did that event. Um, Before you, I saw that you did that. I did that one, and it was so cool because I read from my novella L.A. Stories.
Yeah, yeah,
L.A. Stories was the three-part novella. My novella was called Lady Tomahawk. The two
right.
other novellas were by Alex Czak, which I know you've had on,
Yep,
and my friend Scotch Rutherford, who
right.
designed
Jim.
the cover of Namaste Mart behind you right there. Scotch is a great
Yeah, I
writer,
read that.
so great at designing covers. But the main character in my book, he was a male prostitute who in the story it was supposed to be that Richard Gere based his character in American
American
Gigolo
Gigolo, sure, yeah,
on
yeah.
on my fictional character who didn't actually,
Uh-huh.
it's not true, but that was the whole idea.
Right.
And so when I read, Gabe knew the story, he knew what was going on, and he did this like cool jazz version of "Call Me" by Blondie. Like it was so perfect. It was like, man, this is so awesome.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, that's funny. And actually, you received I think if I remember correctly, you received a decent amount of accolades for that story or that novella as well.
Yeah, yeah, it did really well. It got quite a few reviews. Yeah, it was cool. It was a really exciting thing to have come out there. I have it right here. It's an amazing cover. I don't know if you can see that well. It was made to look like an old school
Yeah.
VHS tape. Alex said when he was talking with Scotch about how he wanted this cover to look, because it was set in LA in 1980, like George C. Scott, hardcore kind of a vibe. Um, he wanted it to look like a porno cover that you were afraid to touch at the VHS store. Like you knew
Yeah.
everybody else had rented it, but you didn't want to touch it, and he just wanted to like dive into like the grime of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I think it was really cool when it came out because I think people picked on we made a lot of the three of us made an effort to have it be so different from anything else that was coming out at the time, because another element to it is that it's three novellas, but there are characters that we all planned on in advance that would appear in each novella, so you sort of get
Gotcha. Yep.
a different side of the
Right.
same character from different authors. Like,
There's tie-ins. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like one, the character appears, he's a radio host, but then in mine, the radio host, you never actually see him on the air, but you only see like the personal side of him. We all kind of filled in the character together. And I thought that was, yeah, it was a really fun time. And those
Sure.
are they're great guys.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that because I grew up in LA and I remember, especially down in Santa Monica, I'm sure in Hollywood too, but I remember more Santa Monica because I grew up down there. Um, like in the 80 to 85 or so, I want to say 84 or 5, you still had all the porn theaters too. Like
Yeah.
there was the Pussycat Theater and things like
Yeah.
that. And there were a few of them around. And I never got to go in any, I was too young. But and now, I kind of wonder, I mean, what those were like inside. But
Well, we got for the introduction for that book, we got the guy to write the introduction was Rex Weiner. Rex wrote he was one of the original editors of High Times.
yeah, yeah. Sure.
He wrote an
Remember that one, huh?
episode. He wrote an episode for, yeah, for Miami Vice. But I remember the night that I first met him, such a nice guy who also for Los Angeles Magazine, he was the first guy to write about Free Britney. He was the guy that broke all that. All these other journalists kind of picked up on him. But
Gotcha.
Anybody that knows that story, look up Rex was the guy that broke it. But he knew that I was just getting published for the first time, and it was one of the first times I had done a reading at Switchblade, and Rex said,
Right.
should really value this time when you're just getting started because I really value when I got started writing porno novels for the mafia. And I just said, what? Like,
Little double take, like what?
could you explain that to me? And I'm forgetting the crime family right now, but he at some point he had a job, way back when he was really young, writing porno novels for the like smut faction of the crime family. And then eventually, like there was like a mob war, and the guy that had brought him in got killed, and he
Right.
moved on. But he said, they basically just paid you for whatever you needed to do.
Hmm.
And as long as you just covered certain points, you could just write about anything. And he said you just made a lot of money, and it was just like a way to learn how to write. And so he
Absolutely.
knew what he was talking about when
Yeah.
wrote the introduction for that book.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, so let's move to the second blurb. And I love this one just because it brings up other writers. And I always find it so interesting, whether they're way off base, which happens, or
Yeah,
whether they're spot on. I
yeah,
love
yeah,
hearing when writers get compared to other writers
yeah,
because
yeah.
it,
Sure.
it kind of brings us all in and we go, oh. So the second one is from Craig McDonald, and it says Andrew Miller's debut novel evokes the boozy spirit and black humor of James Crumley and early Joe Lansdale, but stands apart because of Miller's distinct winning voice and attitude. So you've got James Crumley in there, who I love, by the way. The Right Madness, The Last Good Kiss, The Wrong Case. Just a phenomenal writer. Bay Area, also up kind of in Midwest Montana area, that kind of thing. But
Yeah,
really, really good. And then obviously uh, Joe Lansdale, who we've actually had on the show, who's great
yeah,
writer,
yeah,
great
yeah.
dude. So when you hear a blurb like that, when you hear comparisons like that, what goes through your head?
As far as Crumley, I've known Craig McDonald since I was a kid, and I've always known that was one of his guys. And I have to admit, I still haven't actually read any Crumley yet. That's one that like I know there's all these people in my to read list, and he's one of them.
Excellent. Yeah, he's
Um,
so good.
I've heard nothing but good things, but Joe Lansdale, definitely. The Hap and Leonard books, I mean, everybody knows how great they are. But I explained earlier when I was talking about my book about how, The Other Detective is based on a good friend of mine.
Mhm.
And my friend is, he's just a really, valuable part of my life, but he's just incredibly different from me. Like we're both,
Yeah, yeah.
we always would get when we would just kind of, go out to bars and hang out and whatever, people would say, you two don't seem like friends. And I just love the way that like Hap is this lefty and Leonard is a gay black Republican, and that Lansdale is just showing you the value of just having friends that you might not always agree with everything. Like it's such an important part of life to just have someone in your life that's different from you. And he did it in such a good way. And so that
Espe-
part,
especially now,
yeah, for
because
sure, of course. Yeah,
we're so fragmented in
yeah,
that
yeah.
way where it's like, oh,
Yeah.
he doesn't feel the same way about me about blank.
Yeah.
So, he's not my friend anymore. Yeah, it's like, come
Yeah,
on.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean those books are also they're so funny.
Yeah.
And he's just such a good like he's one that there's so many great writers where it's just obviously he gets the credit that he deserves, but I don't think people realize like you don't always see how well crafted it is. And I think that's how a real master can be sometimes. You don't really see like how just how brilliant it's all put together. And yeah, I definitely think that the Lansdale comparison is a good one. I haven't read Crumley, so I can't quite say. But I
Mhm.
also I in high school I directed a feature length VHS adaptation of James Ellroy's American Tabloid. There was this like special class that I was in
Mhm.
where you could do a video project instead of turning in a big English paper. and I had my buddies playing, like I had a little buddy playing, JFK, I had another guy playing Jimmy Hoffa. It was R-rated, it was 95 minutes. I turned it in and I got an A, but Craig McDonald at that time was running a James Ellroy website. And I just sent it to him and he reviewed it favorably. And it was like, he was the first guy that it was like, oh, this is a real writer. Like, this is a guy that actually does this.
Right.
And he took me seriously even when I was a kid.
Hmm.
And so it was just like this really like deep source of encouragement in my life
Yeah.
to get that then, and then to have him read my book and give me
Yeah.
that quote now. That was a really big deal for me.
Okay. So I just want to say something out there to anybody who might watch this at any time or listen to it or whatever. That what you just said right there is so great. And I just want to throw in for 1 minute about how I got started as a writer, just because it's so important for people to hear this. Because if you feel like you need to write, you did that,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And that ended up working out for you, and that is phenomenal. I wanted to write. I was already writing a terrible, terrible, horrible novel that we're all happy nobody has ever seen the light of day. That's good. But I was working on that, and then I was a student at Berkeley at the time, and I went to my, of all things, no bullshit. I went to my legal studies TA, and I went, okay, I see we have all these papers due. Can I write these papers that include the cases that I need to include, whether it's, Plessy v. Ferguson or, Brown v. Board or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
But can I do it in short story form? And amazingly, he said, yes. And so I started writing the entire semester. I started writing these stories about these cases, and I'm sure they were quite bad. I haven't looked at any in forever, but I'm sure they're quite bad. But he allowed me to do it, and all of a sudden, I was writing short stories.
Right.
Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they were assignments, and they were creative writing, but they were also, you know, trying to hit on all the assignment specs and hitting the cases that needed. And that's the kind of thing. Like if you need to write, find a way to make it work. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
for
Like just
sure. For
just
sure.
do it. If you've got it in you, yeah, even if everybody says no, like even if that guy had said no, I'd have still written. I wouldn't have written about those cases, certainly, but I would have still written. But the fact of the matter is when you can get your work in and your voice out, regardless of what it is, do it. Just do
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
You
For
know,
sure.
it's such an important thing. People talk all the time, and you know this as well as I do, and you've done it, right? You've got the novel out. I've done
Yeah.
it. I've got a novel out where everybody says, how many people have you run into in your lifetime? And they say, ooh, I'd love to write a novel.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. There's no, it's not like
Just,
you got to
just,
do it. You got there's
just do
there's
it.
no
Yeah,
there's like
just
a
do it.
day where it's just
Don't,
all the stars are going to be aligned and it's all
yeah,
just work
yeah.
out for you.
Don't,
You have to
don't
still
tell me you want to do it.
yeah.
Do it.
Absolutely. For sure.
Like, you know what I mean? Like that's all there is to it. And I wrote two novels that are bad. One of them, the first one I was talking about, I never quite even finished it. It was horrible, but it was fun, and and I spent a lot of time doing it. And then the second one was not great. There's some good pieces to it. I
Yeah.
was trying to draw on, you know how it is. You're a young writer, you're trying to draw in all of these different influences, of for me at the time it was Cormac McCarthy and James Lee Burke and a few other writers, and you're trying to draw in all this language and looking back, 75% of the book doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
But the interesting part is 25% kind of does. There's some decent stuff in there. And it's never seen the light of day, and that's a good thing. But you just got to do it.
And there's value in, when you get to the end and you see that there is that 25%, you know what works and you know what didn't work.
Yeah.
And there's also this element, it's like I wouldn't say that I don't believe in inspiration because I feel inspired by things all the time. I feel like, yeah, like that's such an inspiring thing to hear. That's
Mhm.
such an inspiring thing to listen to. But what I hear, you've lived in LA, I live in LA. There's so many artists, there's so many people in their various fields trying to make it, but they talk about they need to be inspired to do something. No, just do it, and then you figure out what works after the fact. The
Absolutely.
more you sit down and do it, the more you're giving yourself more of a chance to be inspired. That's all that.
Absolutely.
Sit down and do
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely. Okay. So there's a quote by Philip Roth, who's a wonderful writer. I don't love all of his books, but it's most of the time it's because of content. It's not because of his writing.
Yeah.
He's wonderful. But he has a quote that's just one of my favorite quotes about writing, which is that the and I'm paraphrasing, but the gist is, the precious few of us wait for inspiration, the rest of us just get to work.
Right.
And that's what it's about. Like, don't get me wrong, when you get that lightning bolt strike and, it happens sometimes, that's phenomenal. That's great. But that's not going to happen a lot,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And you still got to do it. You still got to put your character forward. You still got to
Yeah.
put that story forward and so it's so one thing I want to say on Crumley. You mentioned Crumley. You haven't read him yet. I look forward to you reading him,
Yeah.
especially because you've been compared to him. But what's funny is Crumley reminds me in some ways his detective novels remind me a little bit of Pynchon.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you've read Inherent Vice or
Yeah.
seen
I
Inherent
have.
Vice or both, uh, his PI novels have that vibe,
Yeah. 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 For sure.
and
That's
so
definitely inherent vice, I would say, is for a flashpoint to sort of compare my book. Like Vern Smith at Run Amok, he described this as a slacker noir.
right.
And so, Inherent Vice, maybe The Big Lebowski,
Uh-huh.
Altman's The Long Goodbye. This book is definitely a similar vibe to that, and so I'm aware that that's kind of an overlap with Crumley. I haven't read them yet, but yeah, that's for sure. That's definitely I could see that. I
Okay.
could, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and it's funny because I read Inherent Vice. My dad gave me the book. He was a huge Pynchon fan. I've read some Pynchon.
another
Um,
very funny writer, very
very
funny
funny. Oh man, very funny. Also sometimes a little nonsensical, but
for sure. Yeah,
but but very funny.
don't
Um,
expect to understand every page of Pynchon if you're going to sit down and read.
yeah, I mean,
Roll
Look
with
Like
it and
Gravity's
don't forget.
Rainbow
Yeah,
is amazing, but
yeah,
you feel like you're putting in work too at the
yeah,
same
for sure,
time, you
absolutely.
know. But yeah, Inherent Vice is it reminds me of Crumbling a lot. So that'll be fun to tie all that together.
Yeah, yeah,
So let's talk real quick about LA. You're an LA transplant, even though you've been there for a while.
yeah. I
Okay,
live in Pasadena now. I lived in Silver Lake and Echo Park and that area for a long time.
gotcha. No offense. So you've kind of made your way around the hip areas of LA.
I kind of, became an old curmudgeon and just I can barely stand the hip areas anymore. And I
Right,
love how just like quiet and calm and the mountain air in Pasadena. Yeah,
right.
I outgrew it, I think. It's nice to go back. It's nice to go back and visit sometimes. It's nice to go to like the New Beverly and the Vista, but I enjoy Pasadena out here.
Yeah. So what brought you out to LA originally?
Well, it was a lot of things. I always was interested in writing, but I brought up my American tabloid film
Ah,
earlier, and I'm a big movie guy. And it was kind of a period where I wasn't sure which the main thing would be. And so I definitely thought I would do more work in movies. I had a whole bunch of friends that were just all moving out to work in film production. And I worked on a lot of things, and I actually worked on a few that I'm pretty proud of. But what I came to really realize is that the collaborative nature of filmmaking, it works for some people, it doesn't work for me. It's just, there's a team that gets a book out. Like there's just so many people that run amok that this book would not exist without these people. But, to get the book to the first stage of editing, it's just you. Like
yeah,
it's you
yeah,
alone in a room. And that is what I realized was for me. But that was when I first came out here for that, and then
Yeah,
realized I kind of liked it more. I miss certain things. I'm originally from Ohio, and I miss certain things about it. I miss
sure, of course.
being
Yeah.
able to find a parking space, But I love it here.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's interesting. I have talked to screenwriters about that, and I've talked to Daniel Pine about it. I've talked to a few guys on Instagram about it, and I think it's so interesting because as a writer who does nothing collaboratively,
Yeah.
I mean, we put the review together collaboratively and stuff, which is cool, but in terms of writing itself, I don't do anything collaboratively. And
Yeah.
so it would be so strange to write dialogue and have somebody go, no.
No, I mean it's what crushed F. Scott Fitzgerald. Like he thought he was going to come here and the movie was going to be the equivalent of
Sure.
The Great Gatsby, and like no, it's not that. But then when William Faulkner comes out here and they tell him like, go write this World War II picture with Ronald Reagan, and he goes, yeah, give me three, and he goes, they say what, you want 3 months? He goes, no, 3 days, and he just that's it. You
Right.
just you got to know. Like for me, I have a credit on a documentary called Soul of Lincoln Heights,
Hmm.
and I'm really proud of being involved in that movie. But it's just I don't look at that movie and see you're seeing my voice. It was more like the director. It was a guy named David Trevino. He just he was a good guy. Like he was a good guy, and I liked him, and he had read something that I liked, and you gotta go into it with the idea of, do you want to help the people that are going to be responsible for the final product? Do you like them?
Right. Yeah,
And
sure.
you just got to not be too touchy about if things get changed after the fact. And it just
Sure.
that movie turned out really well, and I'm really happy that he wanted to involve me, and it was cool. But I don't really think anybody's going to be like, oh, that's an Andrew Miller piece of
Right.
writing. It's not. You wouldn't
Well,
see anything like that. Yeah.
okay, so there's two parts of Hollywood I want to address here real quick. Number one is no one ever, ever, ever says, "Whoa, I think less about the book now that that movie sucked."
Right. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Never. If your book gets made into a movie, it can suck, and you still go, "Well, there's still the book."
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That's
For sure.
so
Sure.
that part's good. But the second part is Hollywood has the weirdest relationship with writers
Yeah.
because like Jim Harrison. I remember Jim Harrison. I'm a huge Jim Harrison fan.
Me too.
Writer from Michigan,
Yeah.
poet, novelist,
Screenwriter. Great screenwriter.
novellaist, if that's a word.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
wrote a ton of shorts. But okay, so from a movie perspective, right? He went from a poetry professor at a university making $20,000 a year or whatever it was, in the late '70s, early '80s, to publishing Wolf. Wolf got made into a major motion picture
Right. Hmm.
with Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
Then a couple years later, he then had Legends of the Fall and Revenge.
Hmm.
Legends of the Fall, of course, was Brad Pitt and
Yeah.
Eden Quinn and those guys, Anthony Hopkins. And Revenge was Kevin Costner, Anthony Quinn, who was fantastic, uh, Madeline Stowe. Anyways, my point, backtracking, was that with Wolf, he sat in the meeting, and there's producers, directors, and I some of the other bigwigs, and there might have been one or two of the actors, and he at one point interjected a couple of things. It was his novel, right?
Yeah.
Interjected a couple of things, and the producer told him to shut up. You're just the writer. And that's like the funniest thing. It's like the whole thing is based off of his work.
It's based off of his work, and it's based off of a system where the person that told him to shut up is bluffing, is entirely bluffing. They don't know it's like, other than a just guaranteed success where someone has proven that their name can absolutely guarantee people to go buy a ticket, which is so incredibly rare today.
Yeah.
Those people that claim that they know what needs to be in the movie and what needs to not be in the movie based on how much money it's going to make, they have no idea. It's all a bluff.
And it wasn't even the director. Like
Right.
if the
Yeah.
director is going to say it, okay,
Yeah.
like you're adapting my vision or whatever. But a producer,
Uh,
their
yeah,
whole job is to keep people in line.
yeah,
That's it.
exactly. Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
and get
Mhm.
money for the project. Like that. So just Hollywood has the weirdest relationship with writers. It's
Sure,
just it's so
sure.
strange. Okay, so let's talk real quick about Elroy because I know you're an enormous Elroy fan,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so I want to touch on that. So when did you discover Elroy?
I discovered Elroy. I saw the movie of LA Confidential when I was in middle school. And then I remember like, wow, like that was such a good movie. Like it was just
What?
thing just like clicked. And then I remember getting the VHS as soon as it came out.
Uh-huh.
I was watching the
I still
behind,
have the VHS.
yeah, yeah, and I was watching the behind the scenes, and it was just like a well-produced documentary where like Curtis Hanson and Brian
Mhm.
Helgeland and everybody's kind of doing, you do what you're supposed to do in these things. And then it goes to the guy that wrote the book. And he's just he doesn't appear to be acknowledging how he's supposed to behave
Mhm.
at all.
I
And
believe that.
and he says when they optioned my book, I didn't think they would ever make the thing. It was uncontainable. It was unconstrainable. It was unadaptable. It was a book for the whole fucking family. If the name of if your family is the Charles Manson family, and I was just like, what the hell was that? Like I couldn't believe like this maniac,
Yeah,
like being actually a maniac. Like, I didn't
a
understand.
little
It's
bit. Yeah.
like if you've never seen Elroy in an interview or just like seen him speak or at readings, he's a wild dude.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
based off of that, I looked up, I bought the book and I read the book in seventh grade, and I saw that the book is so much better than the movie. Elroy doesn't like the movie. He's come out and admitted that he doesn't think it's any good. I think it's a good movie, but I just started going through all of them. I mentioned that I made that VHS adaptation of American Tabloid. I read them all. I was influenced by his outlook of the world, where you just sort of he blends, for those who don't know, he blends fact and fiction, and he won't tell you
Yeah.
which is which. And he's known as the demon dog. That's the name that he kind of gave himself, that really stuck when he was pretty young, early on in his career as a writer. And a literal way of interpreting that is that he's this dog taking a giant piss on history and claiming it all for himself. Like, you just have to just accept his vision, but you don't know if it's something that he made up or if it's something that's real. And what I would find out is that the things that seemed made up, that had to be just crazy, they were too crazy to be real, were true. And there were things that just happened to be left out of history books. Like, off the top of my head, I in some of the other videos I've watched, you seem to be doing it in a different room, but sometimes you have white jazz behind your
Oh
head.
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
White jazz, for those who don't know, it's about it's just an incendiary, just frenetic novel about an LAPD lieutenant who is just he's the first person narrator. He is a just vicious monster. He's a racist. He kills people, and he is involved in the city's effort to push all of the people that lived in Chavez Ravine in
Yeah.
1958
Dodger Stadium. Yeah.
out so they could build Dodger Stadium. And I would just assume like, oh, like I'm reading this pretty much as a kid, like this guy has to be making this up. And then
No.
later on, I come to realize, oh, like this is what actually happened.
Yeah.
And he was doing this. I mean, it's much easier, the internet and everything. It's easier to find out these facts now.
Oh
But
yeah.
Elroy was like laying all this stuff down a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so it's just, the books are so good. They're powerful. They're the closest thing that, you get to just, Joyce Carol Oates called him the American Dostoevsky. And I think that's pretty accurate.
Mhm.
Like I also said, they're really funny. Like he's just a very, very funny man. And he finds a way to put that into his books where it'll just be like very, very serious, but then he'll just have like a really childish joke
Oh
thrown.
yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The yeah, two real quick things here. Number one is that Peter Ferris, who's a wonderful writer from Georgia, um, on A Trunk Full of Zeros, which was my first Sonny Haynes book. Um, the he one of his blurbs is, he wrote something along the line, I'm forgetting, but something along the lines of Townsley is a demon dog of Angelino crime fiction, and I was like,
Hell
what?
yeah.
Because I knew the reference with Elroy, and I was like, oh, okay. Very cool. And then the second thing is Elroy does he is so visceral with regards to his language and
Right.
doesn't pull any punches, which is great. But okay, so I have this. I'm walking my dog and I'm listening to uh help me with the titles because I'm not as
Yeah.
much of an Elroy guy as you, but
Yeah. Yeah.
the Lloyd novels.
Blood on the Moon, Because
Right.
the Night, and um, I'm drawing a blank on the Suicide Hill.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I really like that
Yeah.
trilogy.
For sure.
Really enjoyed it. But in the first one, they're talking about the race riots, and it's just N word after N word after N word for like the first 50 pages, and I didn't know it. And I'm walking my dog, and
Yeah.
I've got the audiobook right here, and it's on out loud, and I'm just walking past people, and it's just like N word, N word, and I'm sitting there like, oh my God.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure.
You're
I
just
mean,
walking past me,
I,
and I'm like, oh man.
for one thing, he would say, I think that he would say, I didn't make the world the way that it was.
Yeah. Well,
And, if you're going to be honest about the type of character that he writes about were to speak and the type of language that he uses, like, yeah, you could take this stance of like, we need to erase the way things really were and not
right.
portray it honestly as artists, but that's not the way to do it,
Oh
you know?
man. I mean, Andrew, so we've talked about this a couple times because your short story that was in the first review, Burnley
Yeah.
in general, we talked
Yeah.
about that back when it was being published because it has the N word in it, which, was about a bunch of Civil War veterans in the late 1860s, early 1870s, and how else would they have talked?
Right.
I mean,
Right. Right. Right.
I mean, what, and
Well, it,
I've gone through the same thing with the Sonny Haynes novels because we're talking 1951, 52, 53 at this point, which is where I am, 1953.
yeah.
And I mean, if you don't include it, it it seems false. Like
Yes.
it, you
It's
don't have to like
disrespectful
it, but
to the
it's
past.
just,
Yes. It's disrespectful to what
yeah.
people.
I mean, it's it doesn't mean I like it, but you can't act like it wasn't there,
Right.
and so it is a tricky situation because a lot of writers will tell you, oh, you just have to write it exactly as it was published, and that I'm with that. I'm as a writer and as a publisher, I agree. But the modern sensibilities are such that
I would say the modern sensibilities can very often tend to be anti-art, you know.
right, there's a a certain level of either erasing or being PC about it to the point where, like you said, kind of erasing that it existed. And
How do
that
you know that things progressed if you can't look in the past and see
absolutely,
a
oh,
different kind
100%.
of,
Yeah, 100%. It's just tricky because you will have people that, will be like, oh, does this have trigger warnings kind of thing? And it's like, I,
I'm glad that you brought this up because I know we talked about this when we saw each other in the desert out there, but when I read your trigger warning for my story, it was kind of like, all right, I've talked to this guy online. I see what he's doing. What he's doing is really cool, but like I don't know that much
yeah,
about
of
him.
course.
And when I read that trigger warning, it was worded in a way, I can't remember exactly, but it was worded in a way where like, okay, Brian's a publisher and he has to do all the things that publishers do. I'm not a publisher. It's like,
Right, right.
you like what I do or you don't. It's
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
you have to maintain relationships to a much wider degree than I do. But the way that you worded this, it was both achieving the end of what a trigger warning is, but it was also worded in this way that was like it was very carefully crafted, where I felt like you could interpret it in a way that like the guy that wrote this trigger warning thinks that trigger warnings are stupid. And I was just like, okay, this guy's cool. Like I like this guy. He's got to do this, but he found a
I,
way to sort of like
I
tell
think
people that know what's going on, he didn't want to do this, but he had to do it.
I think
Because
it was right, right. I think it was something along the lines of uh, the language in this is historically accurate, but
why
could
would you
be
have to tell an adult in 2024 that this is historically
right.
accurate?
It-
It's just
right.
obviously,
The language is historically accurate, but could be offensive. Consider yourself warned, or something like that. And it's just, it's just like what I mean. What then? Don't read a story about the 1870s. What do you want me to say? Like, I mean,
yeah, I mean, that story is about another thing, like, I talking about Elroy and things that don't get brought up. There was a true life massacre of African Americans in New Orleans by police officers who had been former rebel soldiers. I had never heard this particular story, and the point of the story was a former Union soldier
mhm.
goes west to bring one of the guys that was responsible for this to justice. And so for me to like soft pedal
Yeah, of course.
trying to recreate a real life guy that actually did this real life thing that nobody told me about when I was in history classes as a kid, it would just be so insulting to the victims, I thought that was a very I liked the way that you handled that. It was well done.
Joe Lansdale said it best. I asked Joe about trigger warnings, and
Yeah, yeah. I watched that one. Yeah.
he said, he said, if I wrote it, consider it a trigger warning.
Right, exactly. Yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah,
I was like, all right,
yeah.
so that's pretty much perfect. I mean, what are you going to say to that?
I'm just You were talking about when you were how inappropriate Elroy on the audiobook was, and I just the amount of times that I've like been to readings and had a chance to say hi to him. He is just an incredibly nice man, just so polite. He's very I've got to meet a lot of famous people that I admire, and it's not really that big of a deal for me, but I am so intimidated in his presence.
Uh-huh.
He seems to thrive for his entire life. He's like 75 now
Yeah.
on scenes like what you just described. He likes knowing that you're walking down with your dog and everything is super awkward because you're listening to an audiobook. His last book, The Enchanters, is
Mhm.
one of his books about Freddie Otesh, who was a real life private eye
Right.
who actually broke into Marilyn Monroe's house and bugged her house. He recorded JFK in Maryland. Elroy met this guy when he was just starting out as a writer before
Mhm.
he had died. And so I'm there. You met my girlfriend. I'm there at Vroman's here in Pasadena getting my book signed, and Elroy sees that I've arrived at the point where from the bookmark in the book, because it's like,
Mhm.
the book had just come out and I was like maybe 60 pages in.
Right.
He saw that I had arrived at the scene where Freddie breaks into Marilyn's house and goes through her underwear.
Uh-huh.
And for those who don't know, Elroy wrote just a masterpiece of a memoir about his youth, which includes his period where he was homeless and where he was breaking into girls' houses and just brutally honest about, the fact that he was just this total degenerate. And he obviously is blending a little bit of himself with Freddie in these scenes where he's going
Uh-huh.
through Marilyn's
Sure.
underwear.
Sure. Yeah.
And so there, in front of a lot of people with my girlfriend right there, he sees that I've arrived at that scene and he just starts talking about, oh, you got to that scene where he's going through Maryland's under. That was awesome, right? That was real. And it was the most awkward, absurd, embarrassing. Like
Right.
I didn't know what to do. And I just broke out laughing. Like I just fell over like laughing. This is the most absurd thing I've ever. I've ever encountered. And my girlfriend got a picture of me, like he's just leaning over the table,
Right,
talking
right,
about how awesome it would be to go through Marilyn's underwear drawer.
right, right.
He loves just messing with people. He turned everything around, but he didn't change that element in himself.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Favorite Elroy novel? What do you got?
Bloods Are Over, the third one in his Underworld USA trilogy. It shows what a heartfelt softy he is at his core. It's he usually, he's for most of his career, he's a guy like Cormac McCarthy. He only has male characters.
Hmm.
Bloods Are Over,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
it's really female dominant. There's a character named Joan Klein that's based off of this woman that Elroy had a relationship with. That it's one of his best characters, and it's just like if you get to the end of that book, and if it doesn't break your heart, then you don't have one.
Right. Okay. So, so you didn't know this when I was asking you that, but that transitions fantastically because I was just about to ask you, before that, what the difference is, because this is your first novel, right?
Yeah.
The difference is for you, because you've written a lot of shorts and at least one novella, uh, the process difference between short stories and your novel. And then I was going to lead in with Elroy's outline for Bloods a Rover was 400 pages,
Right,
which
right,
is
right.
asinine to
Yeah.
me personally as a writer to me, but it works for him obviously, so good for him. But yeah, that's insane. So the difference for you, how does it work? Do you plan everything out? Do you outline it? Do you just have bullet points? What
Well,
let's go.
for the short stories, I've done so many, and I always do an outline. I would like to not to try without an outline. We talked about Alec earlier, and I know Alec. He says, I need to not know what's happening next because if it's outlined, it's going to feel like I know, and then the audience is going to know. But for me, I need to stay productive. I like writing, and having a outline of where I'm going to go is just something that's always really, really important to me. And there are changes that happen to the outline as I'm going along, but usually it's an outline for the short story, and then it was an outline for this novel. But it was like for the novel, the big difference is it's like an outline of multiple short stories. There are multiple scenes in this book that I sort of regard as sort of like self-contained short stories with like, a beginning, middle, and end to them. I think that a big I like outlines. I think that it works for me. I understand that it wouldn't work for some people.
Mhm.
Something that can be a problem with that, and that can has been a problem. I think some people regard some of Elroy's latest books. It's almost like you're reading the outline,
Mhm.
and it can be too. It can the humanity doesn't come out, and the
Sure.
the spontaneity doesn't come out enough. Um, but for the element of having I want people to be entertained by the plot. It's a thing where like the plot is both incredibly important, but you don't need to be thinking about it at the same time.
Right, right,
And
right,
so, I don't want people to just like, oh, like this is a bad plot. I want you just to care about the people, but
right.
I don't like, if I go see a movie and it's just a bunch of characters like in a barn, just like talking about their relationships or something, like this is just lazy to me. Like it's not really
Interesting.
real writing to
Right.
me. But yeah, yeah. I mean, I always do outlines, and I don't think that I would ever do an outline that's as long as an Elroy outline, but they are incredibly important for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Because when I write shorts, actually, I kind of do novels the same way. I write, and I don't know how screenwriters do it because I've never written a screenplay. Maybe this is how they do it. I have no idea. But I write in terms of scenes. Like I think this scene, then this scene, then this scene, and I don't, and I write kind of like almost like this is going to happen in this scene, and I've got this idea, and this would be a great line here, and but I don't like it's not fully detailed. It's just
Yeah.
this is going to happen and then this is going to happen. And so you kind of figure it out in between. But
I've had times where I was working on something and I didn't outline it enough. and it was like I spent a month going in some direction and realizing
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I shouldn't have gone in that direction, and that's okay. Like that's,
Yeah. Oh, it
everybody's got to,
happens. Yeah.
yeah, you got to go through that process. But for the
Yeah.
purpose of just me wanting to just, I want to be putting out stuff that I'm proud of, and I want to just stay productive. Having it all worked out, all the important stuff worked out in advance is always really important to me.
Yeah. James Lee Burke, who's one of my favorites, I can only imagine he was speaking facetiously. I'm sure he was, I think. But they asked him about his writing process, and he said, I sit down and I try to write a great sentence.
Yeah.
And when I'm done with that, I try to write another one.
Well,
So I'm like,
you brought up Philip Roth, who
yeah.
just, what an inspiring career to put out all those masterpieces like
Oh,
late
yeah.
in life, just one after another. And I remember
So
a
many. Yeah.
documentary about him, or in his writing office, it was just like, the alphabet, like it was like a picture of the alphabet, and it was just a reminder to him, like it's not even just the sentences or the words of the books. It's just one letter after another. You just,
Mhm.
one foot in front of the other. Just sit down and do it. And it's like
Good work.
a
Yeah.
guy that's working like that is putting out that much stuff. If that's what he's saying, it's like, there's something to that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. All right, good. So I'm going to ask you a few questions here because we're getting towards the end here.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a few questions. So number one, what's the best thing you've read lately? And it can be fiction, it can be nonfiction, it can be a novella, it can be a short story, it can be whatever. What's the best thing you've read lately that you think people should read?
The best thing, it's one that I had meant to read for a long time. It was Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead,
Yeah.
the novel that got regarded as the top novel of World War II. For those who don't know, Mailer was, he's not really like talked about that much anymore. But he was like a titan of the 20th century. He put out
Yeah.
this book when he was 25 years old after he served in the military for 2 years. He was a cartoonishly ambitious man. He says that when he was at Harvard when Pearl Harbor happened, everybody was just like, the country's going to war. Everyone had normal, human emotions about it, whereas he was thinking, is my great novel that I will write about World War II that's about to happen going to be set in the European theater or the Pacific theater? That was what he was thinking.
Yeah.
He graduated from Harvard. He could have been an officer. He regarded being an officer that would not provide him enough material to write a
Probably
good
true.
book.
Yeah.
He became a infantry. He came back and he wrote this book that's just about a platoon on a fictional island in the Pacific. And this is so long ago that he insisted on having the soldiers' language being depicted accurately, and they weren't allowed to do stuff like that back then. And the compromise was that all of the fucks were made fugs. So there's like 400 times in the dialogue where a character says fug,
Uh,
and it's just he's I like Mailer's stuff. I think he got kind of a little too wild and influenced by like jazz and unfocused at times, but he put out many, many masterpieces in his
yeah.
life. But this one is one that he would go on a patrol. He would have a crazy experience on a patrol. He would write a letter about it, send it to his wife back in the States. She
Mhm.
filed these letters. So when he gets back to write, he's got his fresh memories of these crazy things that happened. But at the same
Cool.
time, he says he was an engineer. He was an engineer. He had an engineering degree, and that he treated the book almost in an engineering type fashion, where he's putting together all of these different characters
See
and
that? Yeah.
making them in.
Yeah.
So it's both like heartfelt on the fly observations and a very methodical structure at the same time.
Right. Right.
And it was just like the stars were just aligned for this guy at 25 to have
Yeah.
this top
Yeah.
book. And he never had a book that sold better than that for the rest of his life. And he died in 2007. I
Yeah.
always knew about it. I knew its reputation. And it was really, it blew me away. It's crazy to think of, you're just a reader in 1948 and you're reading that book for the first time, what it must have seemed like
Yeah.
compared to everything else that you would have been exposed to. It was
Sure.
a really good book.
Sure. And that it wouldn't have been necessarily uncommon for people who read a lot of pulp and things like that. But for people
Right.
who read quote unquote, mainstream novels,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was, or especially nonfiction, yeah, that it would be it'd be an eye opener, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. For
Um,
sure.
and Mailer was also one of the few that we look back on in American culture, at least, that had kind of an outsized personality as a writer.
Yeah.
And so, along with Hemingway, certainly,
For sure.
who was kind of, known, even people who hadn't read Hemingway or Mailer,
Yeah.
people who didn't
Yeah.
read at all, knew them.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Nowadays, I'm not sure that's the case. I'm not sure that you can name.
I don't think people would know. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't think there's any writer you could go up to a guy who like I got a buddy, that love him to death. Been friends with him since we were 12. Fantastic dude. Great family man. Love him, just love him. Hasn't read a book in 30 years. I mean, just no interest whatsoever. He even knows I'm a writer,
Yeah.
and he'll do stuff like buy Starlight shirts, but
Yeah.
no interest in the books. And it's like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
But go up to somebody like him and say, name a writer right now, a famous writer, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe J.K. Rowling,
It was also, it's just
maybe.
thinking about that particular book. I wish that it's not going to happen. I wish that it did, but if something important happened in the world, if something important happened that everybody knew about in their lives, in Mailer's time in the late 40s, there was this expectation that someone would put out a good novel about it because
Yeah, yeah,
the way that everybody thought there was this duty in society for
yeah,
someone to stand up and write a novel
yeah,
to have the artistic perspective about what really happened.
right.
And everybody was kind of craving, like, we know that we just went through World War II. We all did our duty. It's over now. The bad guys lost, the good guys won. But what was it really like for the people that were there? And it's just,
Right.
you just don't have that anymore. It's just the
No.
internet.
It,
You don't read as much. It's gone. I wish it was back though.
and what's taken its place is film. Like
I
you
mean,
like an Apocalypse Now
yeah,
or
right, right.
Full Metal Jacket, that kind of thing, talking about Vietnam. Those are things that,
Yeah,
what really kind of, for a lot of people anyway, encapsulated kind of that experience. I don't know that we have that in literature these days because everything is so current, everything's so right now, right?
yeah. I mean, that's a big, like, just to tie it into my book being set in 2013.
Yeah.
I want to be that optimistic that it's that film replaced it, but I go to a movie today
Mhm.
compared to 2013. 2013, that's when, the iPhone is invented in 2007. And so it's been around for a little while in 2013.
Mhm.
But when I go to a movie today, after people have, lived through COVID, where they needed the only thing that they had was their phones, I go to, you can't go to a movie in LA without someone's going to take out their phone. And
That's crazy.
it's just a
Yeah.
movie. Like, why just go outside?
Yeah.
If it's an
Yeah.
important thing,
Yeah.
and they don't even know what they're doing. Like, they don't even realize it's just like this addiction that's just
Oh, it
affecting
is. Yeah.
them in such a negative way. And so it's like, I want to think that, but I feel like I want to be optimistic, but I don't even know if people care about movies as much. I want them to. I hope
Of
someone
course.
does a good enough
Of
movie
course.
where they care enough. But yeah, that's a big part about the setting of the book is just 2013 wasn't that long ago, but it was a different world.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Ethan Hawke makes the point from time to time that, art kind of pushes its way into people's lives
Yeah,
when it needs to.
sure,
You know,
sure.
like the kind of thing where you take something for granted for a long time, and then all of a sudden something happens to you in your own life, and then you turn to art to have it make sense.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean,
And
I just, what I was saying about movies, it's like, I don't think people care as much, but at the same time, nobody was expecting last year when, Oppenheimer and Barbie both get put out on the same day and it becomes this like cultural thing. It was like, that was really nice to see. It's like, I
it was,
thought those were both pretty good movies. I mean,
yeah,
Barbie wasn't really my thing, but so many people told me how good it was. I was like, yeah, that was a good movie. And so yeah, I mean, people still do care, but yeah, I just I wished it's nice to think about like everybody was waiting for some soldier to write a great novel about World War II, and that
Yeah.
Mailer.
Yeah. Yeah. Last question, and then we're gonna move on. Actually, two more questions, but they'll both be short. First off, when Andrew Miller sits down to write, what do you listen to? I'm curious.
This is I'm basically cribbing an answer from, the master here, but mainly Beethoven or
Okay.
classical music. I was actually I met a guy recently who a um, friend told this other guy that I was a writer, and it turned out that the guy was a friend of James Ellroy's from when he
Ah.
first started out as a writer, like way back in the day in Venice Beach. He said, I went to that guy's house, and there was nothing in his house except for a big bust of Beethoven.
That's
That's
funny.
that
That's
that
funny. What's his Bukowski was classical too.
Oh
That's
yeah. I mean, I like a lot of classical. My girlfriend's dad is his name is Frank LaRocca. He's a very successful classical artist. It's just
excellent.
I can't play a musical instrument. I don't know
I'm
anything.
either. Yeah.
I'm so inspired by the mindset of classical artists, especially that Beethoven just decided that he was going to be remembered forever, and he did it at a time that he knew he was going deaf.
Right. Yeah.
It's just it's
Yeah.
it's an otherworldly
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
level of determination. Like, I'm going to put out this great art that people are always going to remember. It's going to be like this flashpoint in the
Mhm.
story of humanity,
Mhm.
but I can't hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy, right? That's
And
crazy.
just to think about that, and it's just like it's both obviously amazing music, but then it's just like he did this. What do I have to complain about? You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I listen to a lot of jazz. I listen to classical sometimes too, for sure. I listen to a lot of jazz. I grew up with a lot of jazz. My dad was a jazzophile. My mom
Yeah, yeah.
worked in the jazz department in UCLA forever, and um, you know, coordinated events for the California Jazz Foundation. I worked a bunch of those, so I just grew up around a lot of jazz. So I listen to a lot of jazz. I tend to listen to stuff for sure that doesn't have a lot of vocals, just because the vocals can be distracting. But just the music itself, yeah, absolutely.
It
And
also it
yeah,
just depends on the project. Like, my next book is going to be, it's going to be in Pasadena in 1959, and so it's like
excellent.
sometimes I have just like a Spotify list of just all Billboard songs from 1959. I'll do something
Oh,
like
without question. Oh, I do the same thing with the Sunny stuff. I will literally put on because with Sunny he's driving around all the time. He's in his Merc and he's got the radio on. So I am always listening to songs, funny enough, from like 1951, 52, and
yeah.
53 because and then I mention them oftentimes, like funny enough, you mentioned LA Confidential. One of the big hits at that time was Wheel of Fortune by K-Star, which
Yeah,
is
for
on the
sure.
soundtrack there too. And in one of the newest stories, he's listening to that as he's driving around up in Palm Springs. But it's like, that you have to surround yourself with that to, be comfortable with it. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
okay, cool. Well, this has been Andrew Miller. He has Namaste Mart Confidential, which just came out. Actually, I'm not even sure if it's out. By the time you watch this, it may be out. Either way, check. You can go to any of the online outlets. Amazon is a last resort. Jeff Bezos has enough money, but go to bookshop.org.
Yeah.
They help independent bookstores. That would be fantastic. Or any of the other major sites that you go to. This is our most recent book, Starlight Pulp Review number 3. Andrew, if you're interested, was in Starlight Pulp Review number 1. Has a Western called Burnley and the General. And been great having you here, man. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, man. You've been ever since I kind of like noticed you online for the first time. I always thought what you were doing was cool, and I've always really felt like you were someone that was supporting me and the type of thing that I want to do, and the type of scene that I really appreciate. And I just very glad to be here. Glad that we got a chance to do this.
Absolutely, man. And I look forward to hopefully we can get you out there at the 29 Palms Book Fest,
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
and then possibly even the artifact thing in July. We'll talk about that, and then I look forward to what you're coming out with in the future for sure.
Yeah.
So appreciate it. And if you watch this, if you listen to it, now we're on, by the way, it's a little side note, we're on YouTube, which we've been on for a while, but now it turns out we're getting on we're on Spotify, and we're on iTunes, and we're on Amazon, and we're on all sorts of stuff now in terms of the podcast. So we're just getting there, but the last one with Hard Case Crime, and now this one with you, will be on those outlets. So if you are watching this or listening to it, pick up Andrew Miller's new book, and thanks so much.
Thanks, man.
In this topsy-turvy